In 2019, President Trump stunned the world by suggesting the United States could absorb Greenland. Imagine if that idea multiplied. A single nation made from the United States, Canada, Mexico, and Greenland. Together, they would dwarf every country on Earth, covering 24 million square kilometers, with a gross domestic product of $31 trillion, and more gold, oil, and people than any other nation. Yet despite its raw appeal, this mega nation will never exist. The truth lies in barriers even bigger than borders. Stretching from the icy cap of the Arctic to the sun-baked shores of the Yucatan, a united territory of the United States, Canada, Mexico, and Greenland would sprawl across more than 24 million square kilometers. That's a landmass so vast it would overshadow every other country on the planet, including Russia, whose 17 million square kilometers would suddenly look modest by comparison. This new nation would command nearly 16% of Earth's total land area, linking rainforests, prairie, tundra, mountains, and deserts under a single flag. The sheer sweep of geography would bring together a patchwork of climates and ecosystems few could imagine. Polar bears in the north, jaguars in the south, redwoods, cactus, and glaciers, all within one border. For the first time, a single country would control both the Northwest Passage and the Panama Canal's approaches, bridging the globe's most strategic shipping lanes. On the map, it's a continent-spanning colossus, one that rewrites the scale of what a country can be. A combined economy of the United States, Canada, Mexico, and Greenland would instantly become the most powerful on Earth. The total gross domestic product would soar to around $31 trillion, nearly one-third of the world's entire economic output. That figure eclipses the European Union by a wide margin and more than doubles the GDP of China. The U.S. dollar, already the world's dominant reserve currency, would become even more entrenched in global trade. Nearly 30% of all economic activity on the planet would flow through this mega nation, and an extra 10% of international transactions could shift toward the dollar. Such financial muscle would give the new country unmatched leverage in groups like the G20 and the International Monetary Fund, where voting power often follows the size of a country's economy. Decisions on global interest rates, debt relief, and financial regulations would be shaped by this single, continent-spanning government. The world's economic balance would tilt decisively toward North America, setting the stage for a new era of resource competition and political influence. A nation stretching from Greenland's glaciers to Mexico's rainforests would command the world's richest stockpile of natural resources. No other country could match its output of gold, silver, oil, or natural gas. U.S. mines in Nevada and Alaska, Canadian operations in Ontario and Quebec, and Mexico's legendary silver belts would together place this megastate at the top of global rankings. In 2024, their combined gold production reached nearly 460 metric tons, outpacing China. Silver output would be even more dominant, driven by Mexico's vast reserves, with over 750 million ounces mined each year. Oil fields from Texas to Alberta and the Gulf of Mexico would pump more than 26 million barrels daily, while natural gas flows would surpass 1.2 trillion cubic meters annually, eclipsing Russia and the Middle East. These resources would fuel the lives of more than 510 million people, over 6% of the world's population. 8 out of 10 would live in cities, from Mexico City's sprawling neighborhoods to Toronto's glass towers and New York's endless avenues. English, Spanish, French, and Inuit would echo in daily life, creating a linguistic mosaic unlike any other. But behind this scale lies a looming challenge: governing such a vast and diverse population, each with its own roots, laws, and ways of life. A union on this scale would run headfirst into constitutional walls built to protect national sovereignty. The United States Constitution requires a two-thirds vote in both the House and Senate, followed by ratification from 3/4 of the states, 38 out of 50, just to amend its core structure. No amendment in American history has ever proposed dissolving the federal system or absorbing another nation as an equal partner. Article 4 gives Congress the authority to admit new states, but only with the consent of those states and the federal government. There is no legal path for merging entire countries with distinct governments, especially those with monarchies or different forms of federalism. Canada's constitution demands even more. The so-called 750 rule requires approval from Parliament, and at least 7 provinces representing half the population for most major amendments. For any change touching the monarchy, official languages, or the Supreme Court, all 10 provinces and the federal government must agree. Legal scholars like Eric Jensen point out that abolishing the Crown or surrendering Canadian sovereignty would trigger this unanimity clause. Each province, from British Columbia to Newfoundland, holds a veto. Quebec's experience during the 1982 patriation showed how nearly impossible it is to get every region on board for fundamental changes. Mexico's constitution sets its own high bar: a two-thirds majority in both congressional chambers and a majority of state legislatures. While Mexico has amended its constitution hundreds of times, never has it approved a change that would erase its national identity or federal structure. Greenland, governed by the Self-Rule Act of 2009 within the Danish constitutional monarchy, would require both its own parliament and the Danish Folketing to consent to any transfer of sovereignty. Danish law demands a 5/6 parliamentary majority or a national referendum for constitutional changes. In every case, the legal machinery is designed to make mergers not just difficult, but nearly impossible, without overwhelming multi-level consent. 600 treaties shape the legal backbone of Canada's relationship with Indigenous nations, each one a living document that promises land, rights, and recognition. In the United States, 574 federally recognized tribes hold a unique status defined by centuries of negotiation, resistance, and federal law. Mexico's indigenous population, nearly 68 million people, makes up over a fifth of the country, with cultural and legal traditions stretching back long before national borders existed. Greenland's Inuit, representing 88% of its population, exercised their own voice in the 2008 referendum, choosing self-rule by a wide margin and keeping decision-making rooted in their homeland. These agreements and identities are not relics. They are active daily realities that bind governments to promises and create obligations that cannot be swept aside. Section 35 of Canada's Constitution affirms that existing Aboriginal and treaty rights are recognized and protected. Supreme Court rulings require governments to consult and accommodate Indigenous peoples before making decisions that affect their rights, even if those decisions reach the level of sovereignty itself. In Mexico, Article 2 of the Constitution guarantees Indigenous communities autonomy over their internal affairs, while international agreements like the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples call for free, prior, and informed consent on changes that impact their future. Maria Lopez, a legal scholar from Oaxaca, points out that while no single indigenous group holds a formal veto over national mergers, the moral and legal weight of these treaties creates a living barrier. Any attempt to dissolve or override these agreements would trigger fierce resistance, legal battles, and international condemnation. The cultural mismatch is just as stark. Language, tradition, and self-governance are not interchangeable. A single government cannot simply absorb the hundreds of nations, councils, and communities that form the backbone of North America's indigenous world. These realities add a dimension of complexity that no constitutional amendment can erase, setting the stage for diplomatic and societal clashes that go far beyond the letter of the law. Conflicting alliances would tear at the seams of any attempt to merge the United States, Canada, Mexico, and Greenland, The United States and Canada are founding members of NATO, with deep military integration and shared defense commitments that reach as far as the Thule Air Base in Greenland, a linchpin for Arctic surveillance. Mexico, by contrast, has never joined NATO. Its foreign policy is shaped by the Estrada Doctrine, a principle of non-intervention and strict neutrality first declared in 1930. This doctrine rejects entangling alliances and military pacts, setting Mexico apart from its northern neighbors. Dr. Samuel Klein, a political analyst, notes that these differences are more than paperwork. They are built into the DNA of each nation's security. Any union would force an impossible choice. Either NATO's mutual defense obligations would be diluted by Mexico's neutrality, or Mexico would have to abandon a century of diplomatic tradition. The result is not just an awkward alliance, but a fundamental contradiction with no easy fix. Even with all the economic power, natural resources, and population size on the table, the idea of merging the United States, Canada, Mexico, and Greenland runs aground on the realities of law, politics, and identity. Each country has built its own system of government, legal traditions, and sense of nationhood over centuries. The mechanisms that guard sovereignty, supermajorities in legislatures, constitutional vetoes, and deeply rooted cultural differences are not just bureaucratic hurdles. They are deliberate barriers meant to shield each nation from being absorbed or dissolved against its will. No matter how tempting the numbers look, no legal shortcut exists. The foundations of these countries are designed to resist exactly this kind of union. The result is a theoretical superstate that remains forever out of reach, blocked not by geography or economics, but by the will of the people and the structures they have built to protect themselves. Borders on a map may look negotiable, but national identity is not. Today, nearly 600 million people define themselves through distinct cultures and constitutions. The power to redraw the world isn't just about economics, it's about belonging.